Okay, Chapter 9, Part 2. More criticisms of advertising. The use of the female body, which is very, pervasive. It's been criticized by feminists in particular, but also other people in society. They say sex sells. That's a phrase that you've all probably heard. But a lot of the times, what they really mean is that the female body sells. So, you'll see a lot of products using the female body to in an attempt to advertise and sell the product or service. And there have been studies about the effects of these ads. And what happens is a lot of girls, particularly young girls, but really all girls and women, are susceptible to body image disorder, also lower self-esteem, body image disorder, also eating disorders are much more common in girls than they are in boys. And one of the reasons why, according to some of the research, is because of the advertisements. So another issue is with stereotyping. There are sometimes there's a tendency in advertisements to rely on quick, easy tropes and narratives, and so sometimes they rely on stereotypes to try to sell products, and that's something else that's been criticized. I've already talked about the omnipresence of ads, the idea, the ads are everywhere, and the role that this plays in consumerism and even hyper consumerism. This idea of I shop, therefore I am. There was a book published called Born to Buy, which is an interesting discussion of our consumer society, and advertising is kind of at the heart of that. We've already talked about deceptive ads. Remember, I mentioned in part 1 puffery and linguistic ambiguity, which again, there's some debate. Some people think those are fine. Some ethicists think that they're problematic. Some ads are seen by religious people in particular as promoting immorality. Ads sometimes are very sexually explicit. There was this advertising campaign by Benetton, or Benetton. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Some of you who are more fashion savvy than me are probably more familiar with them more familiar with that brand than I am. But they were forced to pull an ad. They had this advertising campaign. It was called the Unhate campaign. It's kind of creative idea or whatever. But what they did is they took two people who were supposedly different, or who, for whatever reason, there was tension between them, or maybe they just didn't like each other, and they would have them kissing. And it would be like, they'd have like President Obama kissing the leader of North Korea. It's obviously they're not really kissing, but they would do it in such a way, they would do it digitally. And so, some people took issue with that. They had one where the Pope was kissing an Islamic religious leader, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And people got really ticked off. Like, Catholic Church got ticked off, Al-Azhar University got ticked off, and, so that's the kind of thing that people take issue with. So if you're going into advertising, you might think to yourself, well, what are some things that I can do to kind of ensure that my advertising campaigns are ethically sound? Well, one of the scholars came up with this TARES test for ethical advertising, TARES. Truthfulness, make sure your ads are truthful, visually and verbally. Authenticity, make sure that your claims are authentic. The claims that you're making in the ad are authentic, that they're sincere, right? Is there a genuine need for the product? Now you get into some issues, right? Because a lot of the products are not even really needed, right? But hopefully you can make a convincing justification that the product is needed or the service is needed. Respect, you want to be able to respect people with your ad, all people, all members of the public, right? Equity, You want to make sure that everybody can understand your advertisement. It shouldn't just be meant for a certain group, if at all possible. And then, although I mean, with one caveat, there are some products that are only for some people, so that's obviously acceptable. But the ad itself should be understood by everybody. It should be easy to grasp. And then the S stands for socially responsible. Are all of the different groups that might be affected by the ad dealt with fairly and responsibly? So this is kind of a little set of guidelines. It's kind of a neat little cheat sheet, that you can think about when you're designing an ad or when you're trying to evaluate someone else's ad for its ethical quality. Now, some ads, we've been talking about a lot of criticisms of advertisements. A lot of advertisements are either completely benign or, in some cases, very positive. So, social marketing is advertising that persuades people to change bad or destructive behaviors or to do good things. So you have these public information campaigns, right? They have a lot of stuff now about, don't text and drive, right? They've always had the stuff on, don't drink and drive, stuff like that. But if you click on this link when you get some time, there are some really powerful, I mean, if we were in class and I would go through some of these, but click on this link, some really powerful examples of some social awareness campaigns. These are campaigns that are designed to bring awareness to some issue. So you'll see some on there's on spousal abuse, child abuse, and other things, hunger, child safety, car seats. I mean, really powerful campaigns. If you just click on that link when you get a chance, and a lot of these campaigns, a lot of the social marketing campaigns use fear appeals. That means they try to get you scared about something, right? They try to get you scared so that you're like, oh my God, I don't want that to happen to me, or I don't want to be involved in any way with something so tragic. And so it's supposed to get you to adapt to some kind of a good behavior, to adopt a healthier behavior or response to a particular situation. That's kind of the objective, right, of the social marketing campaign. Now we want to turn, and last few slides here of this chapter are on public relations. What is PR? Well, it began as press agentry, which is just trying to get attention for your client. It's now a much more comprehensive process. It's based on the two-way symmetric model, which is a model of PR that emphasizes the profession as a system of managing relationships among organizations, individuals, and their many publics. So it's a comprehensive relationship management system. And at a very, maybe a slightly simpler level, maybe the best two-word definition that I've heard of PR is reputations management. You're just trying to manage someone's reputation with PR. That's what you're trying to do. So that means not just breaking out the damage control if something bad happens, but also trying to alert people to good things that your client has done or is doing, right? So managing the reputation. A lot of people, if PR is done right, you won't even know, right, that it's being done. It's not like an advertisement. That's why PR is so effective. With an ad, you're watching the commercial, you know that it's an ad and that they're paying for it, and you kind of have this doubt. You're like, it makes you skeptical, like, they're just trying to sell me something. But with PR, it's very subtle. It's very slick, right? They write a press release. You didn't see them write the press release. The press release gets sent out to newspapers. Newspapers write a story about the content in the press release. You just see a story in the newspaper, but some PR dude or gal sat there and wrote that press release for the company or for the client, right? The press conference, releasing statements, sponsorships, like I mentioned. These are a lot of things that you might not necessarily notice. Now, one of the things about PR, like advertisement, some of the research suggests that it's associated with a lack of ethics. Quotes like this don't help. One well-known executive for Hill and Knowlton, which is a really big PR firm, he said, "We'd represent Satan if he paid. We'll do PR for anybody." And that's kind of one of the things that PR firms get a bad reputation for that. You have PR firms right now representing some of the worst dictators. Like, I'm talking about Western PR companies that are based in New York and London, and they're doing PR work for like Bashar al-Assad, of Syria, or Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt, like some of the worst human rights violators in the world, right? So that begs the ethical question. Is that okay? They're getting paid, they got to do their job, they've got, it's a client, they're going to pay the money. Sisi of Egypt, the current president of Egypt, signed a $20 million, I forget the name of the company that he signed with, but it was some American PR company based in New York, gave him $20 million to repair his image. They're not doing a very good job because he's still, being, hauled over the coals in public, in media circles because of his human rights violations. But that's something that he did, and there was a PR firm that was willing to sign up. Now, there's some evidence that suggests that PR activities can harm the democratic process. Think about how that might happen. Well, one way it could happen is if PR people are like, if the activity is in any way misleading, if they're not really informing us, if they're not providing us with tools that can help our decision making, right? Then that could actually potentially, some have argued that could actually end up harming democratic processes. I have a question. This is just a question for you to think about. Is public relations truth-telling, or is it just manipulation? And is there a contradiction between truth-telling and manipulation? Is it possible that it's both? That's something for you to think about. That's just a little cartoon that you can read on your own time. It's interesting. I've had the chance to work in PR and in journalism, and so I've seen this firsthand. But there's kind of a tension between PR people and advertising people. PR people think about news people as mudslingers. They're like, these journalists, man, all they want is what's negative. And we talked about in the last lecture about journalism, about how conflict, those news values, right? They focus on what's negative and conflictual, tension, violence. If it bleeds, it leads. PR people don't like journalists sometimes. By the same token, journalists are sitting back going, all these PR people, they just want publicity. I just want to cover the news. Give me some real information. When I used to work as a journalist, I used to get hundreds of press releases. And it did get annoying. It's like, I don't care that you hired a new CEO. With all due respect to your company, it's like, I'm not gonna write a story about that. So there's this tension sometimes, but they need each other. PR people need news people. PR people couldn't do their jobs without news people for the most part. They need news people to take that press release, to come to the press conference, to cover the stories. And at the same time, journalists need PR people sometimes because you've got the news hole. The news hole is it's the idea that the newspaper has to come out, right? It's like a hole, and you've got to fill it up. You've got to fill the newspaper up with content, or the 10 o'clock news on TV. It's going to come on. The news is coming on. If there's nothing going on, you better come up with something to say for 30 minutes, right? You better come up with some way to fill up the newspaper. There's a hole. You got to fill it up. Sometimes there are slow days, slow news days. So PR people come in really handy in that for journalists sometimes. So they kind of need each other. VNRs are interesting. This is the last thing I'll say. Video news releases. These are press releases. So you guys know what a press release is. I probably should define press release, and just in case some of you don't know what it is. A press release is basically a little statement that's written by the PR department, right? It usually kind of looks like an article, like a news article. It's got a headline, a title, and then it's got some information organized, sort of in order of importance, and it'll usually have a quote from some key individual that's associated with the corporation or with the organization. Like a lot of the times they'll quote the CEO or something, and then there'll be some contact information. And these press releases are sent off to the press, right? PR people write them, and they send them to the news people, and they hope that the news people will. Ideally, the news people would just take the press release and just publish it as is. That'd be great, because then you're like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to say. But at the very least, you hope that they'll take some of the information and write a story about it, maybe call you, because you've got your contact information on there, and get some more information from you. But then there's this thing called the video news release. This is just like a press release, except it's on video. So what happens is the PR people, the PR departments, or the PR firms, they produce these video news releases. They look just like news reports. Like you're watching CNN or something, it looks just like that, right? Some voiceover, really professional, voiceover, maybe a little interview, sound on tape. I mean, it looks great. It looks like a news report. And sometimes they're so good that the news organizations, the TV news stations will just take these VNRs and just put them on TV. And that raises an ethical question. Because if I'm watching the news, if I'm a news consumer, I've got to know that's not your report. That's not CNN's report. That's not the report of the news organization. That you should at least tell me that that's a news release that was sent by the corporation. Otherwise you're just giving them this free publicity, and you're passing it off as news. And it's not really news in the traditional sense. You didn't do a report. You just grabbed this news release and put it on the news. And so that's an ethical issue. And sometimes news organizations do that. TV news stations, they will just simply take a news release and just put it on the news. And it's almost like they're passing it off as their own. And that's not the issue. The issue is not, it's not like it's a plagiarism issue. The issue is, as the consumer, you have the right to know that this is coming from the PR people, right? This is coming from the PR firm or whatever. It's coming from the corporation or the organization. It's not coming from the news organization. So this happened during the Bush administration. The White House did some really nice video news release, and they sent it to some news outlets, and some of these TV news places, they just put the VNR in. They just put it on like it was a news report. And it's like, this came from the White House. So at the very least, you have to tell me this is a video news release. As a news person, you should at the very least tell me what you're about to see is a video news release that was sent to us by the White House or by company X or whatever. But sometimes they don't do that. And so that's an ethical issue. At the very least, you have to tell them. Now, ideally, you wouldn't even just air it. What you would do ideally, if you were really doing your job as a news station, is you would take the information and you would write your own new report. You would do a new original report with your own editor, your own producer, your own photographer, right? Your own reporter. You would do your own story. But sometimes, remember that news hole? It's kind of handy. Like if you're short on time, you're short on resources, these things are ready, they're really professional, so you just throw them in there. But again, ethically, that does raise some issues. That's it for Chapter 9 on public relations and advertisements. And stay tuned for Chapter 10, probably the next several days.